You have stumbled upon an unusual signal, a transmission so different that it might have you questioning everything you think you know about the world around you. These frequencies are intermittent and unforgiving. They bring us the dark tales of folklore, the stories that fade into the night and creep back to us in our dreams. This is Vast Unknown Radio, where what you're listening to may not be what you're hearing. The transmitter is powered up. The antenna is tuned in a line. That old amplifier, it's humming. Our little blue planet has experienced untold numbers of physical and climatological upheavals throughout its history. Ice ages, volcanic eruptions, and the movements of entire continents have been frequent occurrences marking the passage of geologic time over the ages. Craters and fault lines, both seen and unseen, pock and scar our landscape, creating the overlooked beauty that surrounds us all. It is important to understand that these forces continue to pressure our world, deep below the ground upon which we walk. For example, in the modern era, it has been speculated that a large enough earthquake along the San Andreas Fault would cause the state of California to somehow detach from the rest of the United States and plunge into the Pacific Ocean. Now, while this is an oversimplification of how geotectonic activity affects land masses, that has not stopped people from imagining a future where the Golden State has slipped below the waves and become a modern-day American Atlantis. While the idea is fascinating and worth exploring at some point in the future, what if I told you that the land that is currently recognized as California wasn't always attached to continental North America? Now, this was not in eons past, but rather during the Age of Exploration through the 16th and 17th centuries. For over 150 years, physical maps existed depicting a paradise like no other. A landmass populated by exotic, dark-skinned females. This Garden of Eden, separated from the western mainland of North America, was known only as the island of California. Before we get started, I'd like to remind the listener that while I attempt to keep these transmissions as family and societally friendly as possible, sometimes the topics of esoterica play to the baser instincts of humanity. Additionally, there is no scholar of languages in residence at the radio station. Therefore, I ask for a bit of leniency as I attempt to pronounce non-English names to the best of my ability. Understand that no offense is intended if my articulation is subpar. I completely acknowledge my ineptness in this area. As anyone who has traveled the popular U.S. Route 66 knows, California is firmly and undeniably attached to the rest of the continental United States. So how was the legend perpetuated that this mysterious land was actually its own island? The seeds of the story originate in 1510, in a novel by Garcia Rodriguez de Montalvo known as Las Serges de Esplandian, or The Adventures of Esplandian. In his tale, Montalvo recounts the story of a pagan warrior queen named Calafia, who rules over the island of California. In the story, the queen raised an army of female warriors, alongside mythical beasts known as griffins, This army was tasked with driving the Christians out of Constantinople. Jumping straight to the end of the story, Calafia had to sideline her chaotic griffins. She was beaten in combat and returned to her island kingdom. Vital to the story and future global exploration, a description of the island of California is laid out in the novel as follows. Know then that on the right hand of the Indies there is an island called California, very close to the side of the terrestrial paradise, and it is peopled by black women, without any man among them, for they lived in the fashion of Amazons. They were strong and hardy bodies, of ardent courage and great force. Their island was the strongest in all the world, with its steep cliffs and rocky shores. Their arms were all of gold, and so were the harnesses of the wild beasts which they tamed and rode, for in the whole island there was no metal but gold. Garcia Rodriguez de Montalvo references the legend of Amazon warriors. These warriors were first mentioned by Homer, the 8th century BCE author and poet. In his poem The Iliad, Homer describes Amazons in words that have multiple translations. But they were mostly understood to be exclusively female warriors with the military capabilities equal to or surpassing any male army of the time. Keep in mind that the poem he wrote was actually set in the 13th century BCE, during the time of the Trojan War. It's important to also keep in mind that Homer's Amazons have some factual historic support, and without getting into the weeds on the topic, can vaguely be traced to the areas around the Mediterranean. That being said, Montalvo is not calling the female warriors in his novel specifically Amazons, but rather that they were capable of the same feats of strength and military might. So from that singular description launched a desperate global search for the actual island described therein. Novels of the time often drove explorers to seek riches described within the fictional pages of contemporary romance literature. These books were often a mix of folklore and alleged forgotten truths that was passed down throughout the ages. With the exception of the line, quote, on the right hand of the Indies, there is nothing that places Montalvo's island in any realistic location, not to mention the fact that griffins feature prominently in the narrative. With all that gold at stake, it goes without saying that expeditions were already underway. In 1533, Fortune Jimenez, under the command of Hernan Cortez, learned of an alleged island west of the Indies that was indeed reported to be populated uniquely by Amazonian women. Upon Jimenez's arrival, he was killed by the indigenous population, and the expedition was abandoned. His crew returned and reported their findings to Cortez, who promptly declared that he had located the legendary island of California. Driven by the quest for gold and perhaps more carnal desires, Cortez returned in 1535 and named the area of his arrival Santa Cruz. The establishment of a colony at the location was quickly abandoned for what was termed logistical issues, but more likely it was due to the repulsion of the Spanish invaders by the indigenous population. Either way, Cortez was eventually able to send a crew between the mainland and the alleged island to the mouth of the Colorado River. It would seem as though this discovery would settle the matter of California being a peninsula rather than an island. Cortez attempted to rule over the entire area as part of his Mexican conquest, but with little support from the Spanish monarchy, he was prevented from achieving the title of viceroy. Cortes returned to Spain and abandoned the empire he had created in the Americas. He spent the remainder of his days seeking recognition and trying to raise funds for further explorations. Cortes was finally permitted to return to Mexico, but he never made it. He died in 1547. But somehow, after all that work, cartographical evidence supports that this information was disregarded, and the island of California continued to exist, well, at least on navigational charts, for the next 100 years. As if spurious speculation driven by greed was not bad enough, the perception that California was an island was further supported by a quest for notoriety into the 17th century. Exploration along the western coast of North America by sea was in full swing, and a race to claim territory led to many violent confrontations between the competing powers. All this led to confusion in drawing latitudinal designations of the discovery of, quote, new straits and waterways. Current maps were constantly corrupted. They turned California from an island to a peninsula and then back into an island. Further complicating matters, politically motivated religious authorities put forth writings and dictates that indicated that California was canonically recognized as an island. Their motivation was not driven by the divine, but rather competing land claims between England and Spain. To simplify the dodgy facts, if California was a peninsula, then Sir Francis Drake's claim of Nova Albion for England in 1579 would stand. However, if Carmelite friar Antonio de la Ascensión could persuade the crown that California was an island, then Cortes's claim from 1533, 46 years prior, would prevail, and control of the entire area would fall into Spanish hands. There was nothing magnanimous about the friar's writings, just an old-fashioned power grab and territorial struggle, the rights to which neither side truly possessed. Claims over the island status of California persisted with those in power and, by proxy, their cartographers. They championed the words of those they trusted, and of course whatever information supported their goals of imperialistic expansion. They held fast to their beliefs, even as overland travel increased and conflicting information poured into the halls of scientific authority. Maps in 1622 show California as an island. In 1701, the area is depicted as a peninsula. Skeptics remained on both sides. It's important to remember that we live in an era that we take instant communication for granted. A dispute like this could be settled in a matter of seconds. It's hard for us to imagine that this issue of California being an island was not firmly settled until between 1774 and 1776. You heard me correctly. It took more than 200 years to put an end to the dispute once and for all. It was Spanish expeditionary leader Juan Bautista de Anza and his relentless overland colonization efforts from western Mexico and up the coast of New Spain that established California as firmly attached to North America. And the Baja Peninsula was, of course, its own unique territorial entity. Fictional writings about exotic locations drove our ancestors to explore as much of the planet as possible. In the same way, fictional writers of today drive us to explore new worlds beyond the bounds of our little blue planet. There is not that much difference between Amazon warriors flying on griffins surrounded by palaces of gold and the stories of intelligent species dwelling under the ice on some far distant moon. Both represent the unknown and force us to imagine possibilities beyond our wildest dreams. Some of us will sit and wonder, waiting for others to bring back the facts. Some will strike out on their own, write their own destinies, and perhaps at the same time write the truth or lack thereof, and we'll all accept it. If the idea of California as an island can persist for centuries, what ideas do we possess today that our future selves will find just as amusing? That concludes our transmission for this evening. Let us end with this bit of prose. Wave of sorrow, do not drown me now. I see the island, still ahead somehow. I see the island, and its sands are fair. Wave of sorrow, take me there. My apologies to the legendary Langston Hughes for my butchering of his beautiful words. Vast Unknown Radio is written, curated, and produced by me. My research assistant is Gypsy. On the soundboard, well, that's DJ Chainsaw Massacre. Special thanks to co.ag Music. Tune in next time for more tales of the esoteric and the unusual. And maybe, just maybe, our signals will cross again. Thanks for listening. This has been Vast Unknown Radio.